meeting, and I'll send you out a recap and we'll work on what we need to discuss for next week. That's good with everyone. All right,
Good.
here we go. All right, land use and development.
And I'm sure, welcome everybody. We've got a couple people that I believe are, well, David should join us. He joined us earlier and went back to bed. So hopefully he's woken back up and he will join us again here in a minute. But welcome. So, Shannon, did you have an agenda for this group this morning?
Did not. I was looking back through kind of what we had discussed in, I think, April 28th. And I was looking at some of the recommendations that we had. I was trying to put together something. I think where we are with the catalyst areas. Did we finish the catalyst areas, Bob, to your satisfaction?
I believe we did, and
Okay.
where we landed was that we're generally okay with the catalyst areas, but we are going to need to do a deeper dive
Right.
on the catalyst areas to get down to the level of what we're comfortable with there on all of them. So that's where we landed on catalyst areas.
Okay, one of the things that we talked about we need to circle back to is an idea of the definition for purpose-built student housing.
Right.
So there was some language out there that city staff put together. Does this committee want to tackle that? I can pull that up if we want to look at that.
Okay, let's do this. The other thing that I wanted to get to today, and I think this is probably a little more critical as we go forward, is that the proposed ordinance went forward to Planning Commission the other night. So what I'd like to do, if we can, is to have a recap of what went on. And I'm going to ask Elaine or Larry or Jackie, I don't think Brad's not with us yet, to give us a recap of what the outcome was the other night of the proposed ordinance that would take housing and residential off the list of acceptable uses for our commercially zoned areas. So who wants to tackle that? Elaine.
Elaine, you do it.
Yeah.
By default, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what the Planning Commission did was we had a lot of discussion about the proposed ordinance that the planning and codes had sent to us based on the recommendations from this group and everybody else. And I'm going to tell you two things that we deleted and then we approved it for moving it forward. The first thing was, the second part of it was, I don't know, Shannon, do you have this to put on the screen, this this document that has the tables on it?
Let me look. Give me a few minutes.
Okay. So anyhow, under Article 4, non-residential districts and district regulations, there's a table 19-402 that has table of uses for residential districts. And before, that's where you would find the conditional uses in CCM, CP 1, 2, and 3. So what we did was there was a footnote there that said mixed use structures allowed in CCM, CP 1, CP 2 as part of the plan development. That's really not necessary because there's the process already in place to do plan developments that would go in that district. So we thought it would be less confusing. And if we just took that out altogether. So essentially our information about the non-residential districts that will not include any information about putting residential developments within that. It doesn't preclude it from happening. They just go through the plan development process, and there's section 19-503 has district regulations about the plan development stuff. So we just felt like it didn't call attention to something by putting it there, that it was cleaner just to leave it out. And then in part of that plan development regulations, on the second page, there were several additions that were in red, and one of them was, if you can scroll down to the end of that next section, Shannon, where the red things are, on past that, the part that's I and J that was added. Okay, that's good right there. All right, so we felt like we didn't really need to include 1, 2, and 3 under item I. My concern with the purpose-built student housing regulations and standards was, we don't have any, so why would we refer someone to that when we don't have it? It's just cleaner to not have that. The PD process allows you to assess and approve a variety of standards, so I don't think we need to say that. And it's like, where student housing allowed a maximum occupancy shall be set. Well, the planning commission and the PD process will set a maximum occupancy on any proposal that comes forward. Same thing with the annual inspections. That needs more to be addressed more. It's not in place right now. The only inspections are through, I believe, homes in single family neighborhoods that join the rental housing program. I don't think they do inspections of townhouses and small apartments or large apartments or anything like that. We did want to include the PDs requiring, let's see, PDs in an overlay district shall require BAR approval. We wanted to keep that, so we deleted the first 3, left the J as it is, but changed it to I, and then added a number 4, or I guess it'd be number 5. That would be PDs in an overlay district shall require BAR approval. And that was approved 5-7, Larry, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we amended the first part with taking that footnote out of that table, and I'm not even sure the table needs to be in there now, but we amended to remove the footnote, and then we approved that 5-2, and then we changed this IJ, so there's only I, and added that last item under J, and then approved that amendment, and then we approved sending the whole thing forward to City Council.
David has his hand up.
Yeah, Elaine, as I recall, we had some discussion on this matter, and the reason for putting 1 through 3 in what was, I guess, I, was my concern is if that language is not in there, then it becomes a political decision and at the whim of an evolving planning commission and city council, as opposed to an absolute policy requirement that has to be implemented. And I guess that was my concern, that when you take those out, then the standards are potentially ever evolving based on who's on the planning commission, the politics of the moment, and as opposed to a uniform standard that has to be changed by amendment. So
but do
that
you
was
see
my
our
concern.
right? And I agree with you, but do you see the concern about where we don't have this thing in place for annual inspections, and we don't have the information in place for regulation and standards for purpose-built student housing? So this is going to move forward, and if it goes, if it gets approved, it has the potential to be in place in 3 weeks. And we don't have the other things there that would support that when it does go into effect.
So then I guess the question I have is, so how is this really any different than adding BAR approval to a PD? Because we're not really addressing purpose-built student housing in this.
What the main goal, David, is to ensure that the idea is that our non-residential districts are truly non-residential districts, and that as we move forward, we will be creating overlays that again, in certain areas for catalyst areas that outline all these policies. And we could look at this as some of these things that we're talking about when and if we decide on purpose-built student housing, we add that back in when we actually have that language and those policies done. So this doesn't, it's like we're having to back up a step, and then we will have to come in as we continue our work and backfill these as we create as we land on what the catalyst areas are, as we create, potentially some purpose-built student housing regulations there. And there's other places, like some of the things, the PD language, we could, eventually we can put any of the PD language into the PD requirements in a different section. So when you get into PDs, that's where that might go. The other thing is some of these can go in the rental housing regulations as well. So all these things would support each other. And I think there was some concerns from staff that including some of these things in the ordinance might not be appropriate, may be appropriate, or might not be appropriate. So we're just making sure that we get things in the right places.
To me, it's a matter of getting it in the right order.
Yeah.
That when I look at this, and if we're saying this could be out for the public to look and follow through with in less than a month, and I think that's very possible that this would happen unless it needs to go back and forth some. But where student housing is allowed, okay, so I'll have some property. How do I know where student housing is allowed? I just think we need to get some other things clarified before we take it to this level, but I also think we need to get something out there because there are a lot of people chomping at the bit about this moratorium being dragging on and on and on. So I don't know. If we could get that information together and have it as part of it, I'd be fine with those things in there, but I just don't think we have, where's this allowed so we can do this. I don't know that the rental housing inspection process could handle adding 500 more student beds.
Right. So David, I don't know if you still had your hand up or if you didn't.
Well, it was just a follow-up, I guess. So,
Sure.
I mean, in my opinion, that the current PD process is weak. The current BAR process is weak. And so, because right now we treat PDs as a zoning ordinance and we don't really talk about how things are done. And we don't have much teeth in our BAR process. So I guess what I'm concerned about is unless these other things that are necessary to add these items back in are done quickly, there's going to be a gap that would allow potentially some things to happen that we're actually trying to prevent from happening. So that was my concern.
So I guess one thing we could do is take out of course, it'd have to go back. I guess the city council could make amendments to it, but if you take out where student housing is allowed and just put a maximum occupancy shall be set, annual inspection shall be required. But I think we need to better define purpose-built student housing and what the regulations and standards are. And I looked at the one from Kennesaw, Georgia, that's in their ordinance now, and they've got like full detail of sizes and beds and all kind of descriptions like that and things that should be required or included for it to be purpose-built student housing. I'm all in favor of that, David. You know I am. I'm just trying to figure out how we get from this point to that point.
Yeah, it's problematic to include things in here that we don't have yet, right? I mean,
that's what I'm seeing.
That's the point. So Ken, you had your hand up, and then Chris.
Yes, thanks. So for clarification, we talked about the overlays in the future. My question would be, will the overlays supersede the general regulation language? And, we're talking about strengthening the process that we currently have for the future. So when we get those overlays in place, will the language in those overlays, which it sounds like will be more specific and would be strengthening, would they supersede the general regulations?
Yes, so an overlay district becomes, when you have an overlay district, you can do one of two things on a spectrum. You can either loosen up requirements, or you can tighten up requirements in an overlay district, or you can require additional things, or you can take requirements that exist in the underlying zoning away. So the answer is yes, and it depends. And I think the idea here would be that, like, if we create an overlay for, you know, areas that we're calling catalyst zones, we could say then, you know, here is a place that student housing is appropriate. Here's a place that we want to see this type of mixed use development. Here's and the requirements, you know, all the other requirements that go along with that. So overlay districts give you the ability to add layers of requirements or take away layers of requirements. So you know, again, and I would think ours are going to add layers of requirements, or maybe allow things that the underlying zoning doesn't. So that's what an overlay district does.
Well, I think that's very important that we move as quickly as possible on the overlays, because coming out of the ClemsonNext and with the consultants, the issue was that we were doing these development on a case-by-case basis and ended up with a hodgepodge of different things. And so in order to be able to afford that, I could see the overlays helping us to eliminate that process in the future.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And like all these things that David's bringing up and we're talking about, this doesn't mean that we let these sit on the back burner. We've got to keep moving on these to get these into the right places. And it might be, you know, again, it can be text amendments coming back in this section as we develop them, if that's appropriate, or it can go into that. Some of these things might go into the PD ordinance to strengthen that. And address those concerns David has with our PD ordinance, to beef up our bar approval and requirements. We're going to have to do all those things, but we do have the immediate issue of getting the base ordinance in place. Because right now our pending ordinance, I still think, bans all, you know, multi-family housing in all residential districts, which is becoming, you know, unfair in places that it was never intended to do those things. So, all right, Chris.
I tend to agree with David that these items 1, 2, and 3 need to be left in, because we do need to have some teeth. I wonder if we can leave them in with a footnote or something, or an asterisk that says pending approval of new ordinance. So they're in there. And it's just a note to developers that we are working on this, and we are aware that there are loopholes, and we're trying to solve this problem.
So if we could do that, if we find out from, you know, legally, if we could put that in there, and maybe that has an expiration date sometime in the future, that puts a little bit of pressure on us to make sure that we get them done in a reasonable expiration date. If we can do that, would everyone be okay with that? And I'm going to look at the planning commissioners as well, that if we make that as a suggestion to council when they go forward with this, to leave these in as a footnote pending approval of these other items. And if this is something, again, if people want to add, I know Fran and then David had their hands up.
So Bob, I think we need to hear from Andy, but procedurally, this was already approved by the Planning Commission. We don't have the authority to change what the Planning Commission passed, I don't believe. So
yeah, we can add and we can amend. Absolutely. Yeah.
But it won't come from the Planning Commission. Then if we can add our own suggestions or recommendations to pass the council. But I guess I'm going to ask Elaine or Andy. My understanding is this was actually approved by PC, and we can't add something that they haven't approved to what they're sending forward, I don't think, but I may be wrong.
Andy had to leave to go to another meeting. But I think we can add amendments to these as we consider those, Fran. As Elaine,
I think that's correct. I'm not 100% sure either.
we need to check on that. Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
check on that to be 100% sure.
Can I share with you something from Kennesaw where they talked about lessons learned as they put forward their purpose-built student housing? And I think we're doing some of this already. One is establish zones where PBSH is appropriate. And that's what we're talking about with the catalyst areas, correct?
Right.
Another is to use overlays to designate more desirable areas without having to rezone large areas and allow densities high enough to encourage PBSH in desirable zones and not in undesirable zones. They're talking about allowing higher building heights where the PBSH is to be, and set some standards about parking and those other kinds of things. So there's some helpful information out there where this has already been put in place. And I don't think the document I have right here has the specifics in their code right now, but I have a copy of it somewhere. And I think it may even be in our Google folders, the drive.
Yeah.
There's one that there's a document it was a PDF, so I couldn't edit it. And it's the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting where this was finally approved. And
Yeah.
Starting on about page 26 of that document, it talks about the purpose-built student housing, and it lists all the items in their code and what the requirements are for that.
Right, and I'm pretty sure that is in the Google Drive already, and we can check on that, and that would be a good thing for people to review. David's had his hand up.
Okay, so this has not been adopted until City Council approves the recommendation from the Planning Commission.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Right.
Correct.
And so
And a public
and-
hearing and 2 readings.
Right, and then the City Council does have the authority to amend any recommendation from the Planning Commission in their final approval. Is that correct?
I'm 99.9% sure that we can, but I want to be 100% sure that we can.
Well, and so there's a couple just things just to point out. One is, I think too many changes is both confusing and possibly legally challengeable, right? So if we're constantly changing these things, so I think doing it in the fewest number of steps possible is probably the best approach. But the second thing is I don't want 1 through 3 to get lost, right? So somewhere in the process, and I think I'm concerned that there'll be a kind of land rush by developers if they have an understanding that these 1, 2, and 3 are coming down the road to get in before those happen. And then if that in fact is the case, then we will have a double standard in terms of projects that have come in before 1, 2, and 3 have been implemented versus projects that come in afterwards. And so then I think we run the risk of having a double standard on projects, which I think again is challengeable, right? So or confusing at the very least in terms of procedural policies. So I guess the bottom line I'm saying is that all these other things that are dependent upon 1, 2, and 3 being inserted in here have to be on the fast track, you know, as I think can move. Then we need to be working on these things simultaneously, and then hopefully getting what finally is approved by the City Council implemented at the same time as these other things, right? Because I guess I'm just worried that we're creating a loophole period that is going to create confusion, create varying practices for the very thing that is driving a lot of this. That's my concern.
So let me say 2 things here. Number one, I agree with what you're saying, and I agree that we need to have these fast tracked. Again, I think there is, we absolutely, and that's part of the discussion this morning that we can get to is let's start talking about purpose-built student housing. But so 1 and 2, I think we do actually have an occupancy set that's got a little more teeth than what we have talked
Those are
about.
already in our ordinances.
Yeah.
Guys.
So
They
there
already
is,
exist. There's no reason to add them again.
right. And so I think what we can do with 1 and 2 is we make the recommendation that our rental house regulations be updated to reflect these things and just ensure that they are at the level that we want them at. And that can be done relatively quickly. Outside of the fact that we're going to have to think about, for rental housing inspections to be required, we're going to have to think about a fee for those when we get into high density and all student housing, a fee so that we can add the staff that would be required to do those things. So I think we can handle those 2 things through our rental housing ordinance and our rental housing regulations. 3, we can begin to handle this morning with discussing those student housing regulations that we will put forward, that again, we can get those implemented and integrated where they need to be in the appropriate sections of our ordinance as quickly as possible. So with those comments, Larry, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, a couple things. I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting, but number 1, whoops. Number 1 and number 2 are already in the ordinances. In fact, I have my zoning manual here open specifically to see if they are discussed. 1 is discussed. 2, I'm assuming, is in the rental ordinance already. I don't have that in front of me though.
Actually, that
3,
one would be new, Larry, because right now only I think single family houses and duplexes that are in residential areas are the only things that get a inside inspection at every unit.
Okay.
The high density stuff and bigger stuff get some common area inspection, but they don't actually go into units.
Okay, so we would have to change that clarification in the rental ordinances and requirements. But I agree with Christine, what she said earlier. Let's just, if we can put some type of temporary or language in here that, we are sensitive to these issues and will respond via, the development of the overlay standards and the catalyst areas. If we can put that kind of contingency language in there, let's just do that and move forward. We all agree that we need to do that. Second point, I don't believe the implementation committee has the authority to amend a vote by the planning commission. I think the implementation committee can recommend and suggest, but I don't think it has the authority to actually amend a vote by the planning commission.
No, that's not
really
what we were intending to do here. It was intending to recommend
Right.
that we recommend the amendments to council.
Absolutely. But I don't think we want to get into the situation.
No. We absolutely can't do that as an implementation committee. Can't override a vote or add back in something to the planning commission. No, we can't do that. David, you still had your hand up?
Well, it was just a follow-up. So while, I think the occupancy requirement, if I remember correctly, our discussion was that was also vague, because whether it's beds or occupants, and if it's and vague and frankly unenforceable. So when you do a plan review for an occupancy load, there's nothing that says someone can't put another bed in there. Someone can't sublet a room intended for 1 or 2 occupants for additional occupants, and we have no enforcement of it. So the occupancy requirements, unless they're enforceable and clearly defined and then enforced, have very little, frankly, teeth to them. So because my understanding is the bedrooms that were approved for occupancy in some of the purpose-built student housing developments that already exist are being sublet or directly leased to more than the number of occupants that the plan review process in the projects when they were submitted was approved for. So I think we have to really, another step is to really tighten the occupancy definition and then enforcement, and make it the definition enforceable, which it currently is not, in my opinion.
You just add, last night, or what Elaine and Brad and Jackie, what Monday night, we are, the planning commission is actually discussing that we need to have a redefinition of occupancy. The definition that's in our coding is not sufficient. It's unclear, it's confusing. Agree with David, we have to do that, and the planning commission has raised that issue specifically. The enforcement is a totally different issue. Whoops, I've got a phone ringing. But I agree, enforcement has to be considered very clearly as well.
So that gets us to the point of, are we, as a committee, are we on board with recommending to council that they consider in the approval process of the ordinance that was approved the other night, that we add back, that our recommendation would be that they consider adding back in a footnote that outlines those things that say that we are working on the following, and the expectation will be that developers comply with these regulations as they are approved in the whatever. Do we want to put a time frame on it for these to expire, that say if we don't get our act together and get these down the road, that we that footnote expires?
This is a technical question. I
Yeah.
don't, can you just add something like that says, here's our ordinance, but we're going to change it to this, or we're going to add this? And that concerns me a lot, that it's not a solid ordinance.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's maybe the way that we approach it is that there is a clear message that goes along with this new ordinance that is given. The messaging that is given out from the planning commission is that we have these ordinances in the works and changes in policy in the works, and that when they are approved, you will be required to comply with these ordinances. I don't know that we can, without them being in place, or at least getting them pending, that we, that they don't have teeth until we really get them done. But the messaging I think can be, powerful, so that, if we ensure that the planning office is saying, this is the idea and these things are coming, that if they are approved before your project gains final approval, that you're going to have to go back and live up to these. Fran?
So, but Bob, I'm not clear what you just asked, because I think there are two different things going on. There's a very definite process for changes to the ordinance to happen, right?
Right.
Planning commission, public hearing, city council. This group, really the only role we would play in that process is during the public hearing, or as a council member, you can talk about what this group wants to do. I don't know that we have the authority to add some context to a planning commission just approved, whether it's an asterisk or a footnote, and send it forward with their document. We can go to the meeting, and you can do this, or I can do this, or as members, and say the implementation committee would like this added as you consider this ordinance. I think that's the way we do that. But I don't think we can add it to the document as moving forward directly, right? Because
Yeah, so that's not,
that wasn't
again,
approved as part of the planning commission's document, unless they want to go back and add it themselves. But so I think it's not that we add a footnote to what they said. I think we agree to make that recommendation when council considers their recommendation as part of what we would like to see. So in a sense, it's an amendment to their recommendation that council would have to approve, I think, with that proposed amendment coming from you or from me at the meeting.
Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is that are we as an implementation committee, when this comes about, do you want, again, me or Fran or I to say, this is the implementation committee's recommendation is that these things are really important, and if there's a way that we can appropriately get these into the ordinance or as a footnote to the ordinance, that we think that these things should be stated somewhere, that this is the intention moving forward.
Right.
Because they don't exist right now.
Right.
You know, some of that stuff doesn't exist yet. So it's, you know, hypothetical. Shannon?
So I'm going to recommend that we kind of take a vote or a roll call on what Bob just said. We're not going to be able to move this forward without Andy or some further clarification on the steps that we can move forward on this. So I think Bob's right. Like, if we can decide, are y'all willing to, do you want to make that recommendation? I can go get the information on the process and what's allowed and what we would have to do and how we could, different ways we could do this and get this back to you. But a lot of this is just we're continuing to circle, and I don't see us moving forward on this particular thing right now without that expertise in the meeting.
Elaine?
I was going to suggest that, you know, maybe we need to just take a deep breath and think about this, and maybe we're not ready to send this forward. Maybe the recommendation would be that the Planning Commission go back, and in the meantime, let's develop some things that would give teeth to the parts we've taken out, so we could put them back in. I'm looking at the stuff from Kennesaw, Georgia right now, and their standards for development are very, very clear. And it's things like the minimum lot size, minimum number of residents per bedroom, 1. So I think we can set all that up. We've got this template, and I think we can decide, the Planning Commission, decide what would go in there. But what if the Planning Commission has set aside May the 25th as a potential work date? So maybe we need to take a look at this stuff and ask that City Council, they can look at it, but maybe not the public hearing on it yet, so that we can get these things in it that we want, instead of sending something forward that's not complete and then trying to go back and add footnotes and make changes to it.
Right. So here's the thing. I think the ordinance, as Planning Commission approved it the other night, gets us to where we want to be. As long as we keep moving forward, like right now, while we're, you know, again, the only way that someone could do any residential in our commercial zones, if this is approved, would be through the PD process. The PD process is completely at the discretion of Planning Commission and Council to approve or not approve. So there isn't a way outside of you not, you know, if the public doesn't trust Planning Commission and Council to, you know, right now say, you know, this is appropriate, this isn't appropriate, that's another issue. And that's where the, you know, public hearing and all that kind of stuff needs to come up. Like, we want something more defined, but at the same time, if the pending ordinance expires, then it's Wild West back to where we were pre-moratorium. And I don't think we send this back to try to do it all at once, because I think that is a giant, like, task to have those. And I think if we get this in place, we've got the right base level, that as long as we can, with Planning Commission, and think about things like purpose-built student housing, and maybe that's the focus, that's the next thing that the Planning Commission forwards, that takes care of a lot of the issues that we're talking about right now. And so the only thing, as Fran just said, that if, you know, again, we don't have the authority to say council go or no go. I mean, we can make a recommendation, or we can say, send this back to planning. Our recommendation is to send it back to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission can say no. I think we're getting pretty far outside of what our purpose is if we do those things. And I'm dragging this out further to not get the base level ordinance through that takes care of almost, and sets us up, takes care of the big issue and sets us up so we can dial it in as we go forward, I think would be a mistake at this point. Fran, Dr. McGuire, your hand is up. Maybe you're still on mute. You're definitely still on mute, and that's why we can't hear you.
No, okay, there, it wasn't letting me unmute. I said, I think there are two different issues here. The first was the first part of the ordinance that was tweaked a little bit by planning commission, which we moved all reference to residential out of the commercial zones, right?
Right.
Which I think hopefully we could all agree on that. And I think that was part one, and that was the most crucial part to me.
Yeah.
Part two then was that long list of red items where you were deleting and adding David's concern. And that one might be more of a problem, but I think the first part that we talked about, I would hope we can vote or whatever to agree to that part, because I don't think that was controversial. And I think that's the most important piece that came through the document. The second part, I think, is where we have some concerns, right? The stuff David and others were talking about. So can we separate those two out? Because I fully support, well, I support both, but I fully support the first notion, which I think was a brilliant approach that you all took when you did that. And I hate to lose that and kick it down the road as opposed to making a strong supportive statement for that piece.
I'm not exactly sure what you're saying there, Fran.
Well, am I wrong that those really are two different things to consider?
You mean the baseline ordinance and then the other stuff that we were trying to put in there?
Right.
The how we do things.
Right.
portion?
And the baseline
Yeah.
ordinance is the one that they just removed, if I got it right,
Right.
references to residential and commercials, right? Did not feel the need then to add PD specifically as the route to go and just left it that way.
Right. And there's
That's
a
what I'm
pretty,
talking about. That's the first and I think the most important part. And the second was all those terms and all the meanings that David was concerned about, which I think is part two. And I'd hate to lose approval of part one by getting bogged down in part two.
right. That's what I'm saying, that we move forward and our recommendation is we like the baseline. We like the baseline recommendation or ordinance that Planning Commission approved on Monday night. However, we really, really think it's important as an implementation committee that we, as quickly as possible, move forward with purpose-built student housing regulations, if that's where we end up, that we consider our PD regulations to get all of the how we do things expectations in there, that we ensure that our rental housing regulations reflect the idea of maximum occupancy appropriately, and that inspections of all rental housing in the community be considered and a funding source to have that happen, where we actually go into units to enforce and make sure that occupancy limits and all those kind of things are there. And I think that those are the big three things. So then our implementation committee recommendation is we like the baseline and we think that it should be approved. However, these are the three big areas that we need to have the planning commission, implementation committee, and make any recommendations that are appropriate there, and the planning commission to consider and forward on to council in regards to purpose-built student housing, plan development regulations, and rental housing regulations. And that those things that are currently, that were taken out the other night, these are the things that we want considered in those areas. and are extremely important moving forward. Does that make sense? So then that's just we're recommending that we're okay with it, but our input is that we need to figure out the right places and right methods as quickly as possible to address these other items. Any objections to that? All right, hearing none, that's what we will, Fran and or myself will communicate to council. I'm sorry, I'm taking a note or two here. All right, it is about 9:20. Do we want to have an initial chat for the next 12 minutes about purpose-built student housing? And if so, Elaine has referred us to and referenced the Kennesaw, Georgia regulations. Anyone have any thoughts you want to throw out on the table as far as where we're going with purpose-built student housing? And maybe if Elaine, I don't know if you can do this, and this is totally putting you on the spot, and anyone else that has put any thought into this, let's try to start with the top like 3 to 5 things that we think are important if we were going to put forward a recommendation on what purpose-built student housing would look like. Where do we start that conversation?
Bob, I can tell you where staff started because I have the start of their definition.
Okay, do we want to do that? Do you have that? Do you have a document or that you can pull up?
I do. It's really it's super simple.
Okay.
It is units where each bedroom must have a bathroom only accessible by the bedroom. No bathrooms are accessible except via a bedroom. And all bedrooms must open to the same single common area. Just a second and I'll share that for everyone. This is where they started.
Now the staff isn't here. I get what that is, but my question is, Elaine, you might be able to shed some light on this. Why is that attractive? Why? Again, it seems to me when you get into language like that, you're making those only attractive to one market.
That's what you're defining. You're just defining what that is, not what you want. We
Well,
got to switch mindset.
Right. I'm more concerned with like the layout and the design of it. I don't think, again, because what if the market changes and then you've got all of these units that aren't attractive to anybody else, potentially, or not as attractive to other people. So, I'm more concerned with some of the other things that where student housing is allowed, some of the policies that we have as far as, again, some of the other things that we were just talking about, occupancy rates, our occupancy of those units, inspections, people have, voice concerns now, I think there's arguments on both sides, but, quality, character, the things like parking rates. Does anybody know why you would, what the thought process is there? And I've looked a little bit, but what the thought process is about like getting into the design, like all units must open onto the same common area, why that's important or what that does for you.
Well, we're specifically talking about housing that will be used for students, Bob. I don't think we're thinking that this will long-term be family housing. The common areas typically so small, but so I think we need a general definition. This may not be it. It may be more with if I can share this with you, the PBSH district in Kennesaw is established to promote the development of safe, secure, affordable, aesthetically pleasing student housing apartments for adults attending universities and colleges. Student housing is identified by having at least 4 of the following characteristics: ability to rent on a per bedroom basis, roommate matching service, flexible lease terms to coincide with the academic calendar, furnished apartment units, amenities such as study area, bike share program, and or student convenience store, or student life programming. So the idea is that you define this by which of those do we want to be as in our definition of what it is. And I mean, this is a more design thing, but I think this gets at it better and a little bit more overarching.
Yeah, like I don't see, they don't get into design at all. And
Well,
I understand where you might want to think about design a little bit, but I don't think you think about it in a way, necessarily have to think about it in a way that it's, this dialed in. Design things that I would want us to be thinking about, and this would be for anything, but like where, purpose-built student housing borders residential, that, there are no, the things that we already have to ensure that they're in there still, that there are not decks, on that side of the building, that, some specific things like that. And maybe you do,
so they get into design standards for development, and
Yeah.
it's things like minimum acreage for the project.
Right.
The lot area is not applicable, but I'm going to go down to, this is what I think is important. Minimum number of residents per bedroom is 1. And then the bedroom requirement, there shall be at least 1 bathroom for every 2 bedrooms, unless there's an uneven number of bedrooms in the unit, in which case the odd bedroom shall have a corresponding bathroom.
Yeah.
And then it talks about the minimums for what should be in a bathroom, the floor area for each. I'm not going to read all of these.
Right.
They've got building standards, height standards, use of stucco prohibited, setback requirements. I'm looking to see, I'm just scrolling through this. It's like 4 pages of these
Right.
requirements in there. These are actually in their ordinance about planning and buffer and screening. And I was wanting to see if it had, then we get to access and parking requirements and security requirements. Let's see. And then any other required information. Proposals submitted for rezoning shall be required to provide the information required and that sort of thing. So I think there's a way to do that. I don't know that we want to do everything that they say, but I think that gives us an idea of the way to control that.
So what's that you say minimum of 1 person per bedroom? Did they
Yes.
set a maximum? And do they set a
No, I
maximum
think that-
per unit?
I don't think that, did I say minimum?
Yeah.
Let me go back. Maximum number of residents per bedroom, 1.
Okay, maximum number.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
good. And then, they probably have like a maximum number of bedrooms per unit.
I think
maybe.
it says somewhere, it says no more than 5.
Okay. So I like that. So how about this? David has a comment a couple comments in the chat box here about what to think about. So Shannon, make sure that we capture those. We're a couple minutes away. So my recommendation is going to be this, and David's got something. So David, go ahead.
No, I think that we should frankly just adopt the language of Kennesaw and rather than recreate it whole cloth on our own.
Mhm.
First of all, I think, the more consistent languages across jurisdictions, the more defensible it is, correct?
Right.
And B, I think it seems like they've put a lot of homework into defining this, and I think we can, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel time and time again,
Yeah.
I think we should just frankly adopt their language, and which seems pretty sound and
Yeah.
comprehensive. So
So that was going to be, my recommendation was going to be, we will send a direct link to that. So Elaine, if you and Shannon can work together to make sure that we've got the right document, Shannon will send a direct link to everybody. And so homework this week will be, everybody look through those purpose-built student housing regulations from Kennesaw, and let's consider that, next week we might say, hey, we like it all. Let's make this our recommendation to forward to Planning Commission, that we do this in whole, or if there's any, tweaks or questions, let's forward it with, their regulations with, our comments about those regulations to them. So let's make that the homework for next week. And Shannon will work with Elaine to make sure that we are all looking at the same document. And we'll get that out to everybody later today, Shannon, and then we can all procrastinate until next Tuesday night. And again, if you're not procrastinating, you're not in a position where you have to operate at maximum efficiency. So procrastination isn't all bad. Let's everybody look at that next week, and then that will be our agenda item for next week, is to look at those regulations. And I think that'll get us a good step further down the road with what we were talking about for a long time earlier this morning in our meeting. Everybody comfortable with that? All right. Well, thank you all very much.